Welcome to Mikes and Mayhem with Jenna Wren and Maddie Morrow.
I am aspiring bog witch, Jenna Wren.
And I'm Maddie, but today I'm actually three raccoons in a trench coat.
Yeah, that tracks.
Mm-hmm.
We have mics and we're here, as always, to bring you mayhem.
Yes. And today, this video, we are going to be discussing the newest episodes of Doctor Who. We are so excited that Doctor Who is back. The 15th Doctor and Ruby's adventures have officially begun. And we're so happy.
So excited. I actually said this yesterday to a friend that I don't think I've been this excited about Doctor Who since Matt Smith. Like that, it's been that long. So Disney Plus gave us 2 episodes to start off the 15th Doctor's run in this new season. They're called Space Babies and The Devil's Chord. We're going to be talking about both of them in this video. So obviously there is going to be heavy spoilers, plot summary. If you haven't seen these episodes yet, save this video, come back when you have, and then you can enjoy all of our ramblings.
Yes, yes. And so we're just gonna jump right into it. I will say that you do not need to have been caught up on Doctor Who to enjoy either of these episodes. The way that introduction of the first episode, well, technically it's the second episode because it's listed as episode 2 on Disney Plus, Space Babies. It gives you a really nice introduction of who the Doctor is, what the TARDIS is, and what it does. And that's really all you need to know to understand what's going on. And the 15th Doctor gives that to Ruby. So it's like giving it to a brand new audience.
Yeah, that was the point of the companions in the series always, I
Mhm.
believe, was to have them as a stand-in for the audience. So it really did a great job. The first, like, I don't know, 5, not even 5 minutes. They did it relatively quickly, giving the soft reboot intro, and it's not heavy on exposition, like, you're not being lectured. You're not like, "This is what Doctor Who is about, ba, ba, ba." It's done in a way that's really entertaining, and even as somebody who's watched Doctor Who for, I don't know, 15 years, something like that, it was not repetitive. Like, obviously, I know the whole background to the Doctor and all that, but it wasn't repetitive. It wasn't, like, boring, I guess, to listen to. It was fun because we have a new Doctor, we have a new companion, and to me, every single time that would happen in the series, I never got old. It never got old to me. Like, every time, obviously, there's a new companion, the Doctor has to go through his whole spiel and tell them, "This is the TARDIS, it's bigger on the inside," and he does the whole thing, or whoever they are at the moment, does the whole thing, and it doesn't ever get old, but I think this was a nice, easy jumping in point, especially because it's like I said, it's kind of like a soft reboot of the show with Russell T Davies back and a new Doctor. And yeah, you can just, like, jump in as somebody who's never even watched Doctor Who before and not need to know a single thing, and I think that's a great thing to know if you're somebody who's interested in getting into Doctor Who.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're totally right. Like each time the Doctor regenerates, we get a little taste of who they're going to be. And the Doctor has their memories, from every regeneration. Now we're up to 15. And so each time they give a little bit of their history to their newest companion. Because sometimes when the Doctor regenerates, they have the same companion, right? So, like Clara watched, the 11th Doctor regenerate into 12 and she stayed on with him.
Yeah, Rose, right? Rose was there for
Rose,
10, 11, 9 and 10.
9 and 10. Yeah, exactly. And so it doesn't happen every time the Doctor regenerates. We don't get a recap or, for lack of a better word, it's when usually there's a new companion, and the companion asks like, well, who are you? What is this? Where are we going? What do you do? And like Jenna said, it doesn't feel repetitive. Ncuti and Millie have the most incredible chemistry on screen that it's really just so easy to watch them. It's so much fun.
It is. They really actually gave me they harkened back to me to a little bit of, Amy and Eleven, and I'm gonna get into that in a little bit because there's more that reminds me of them for a specific reason, but they have this, like, energy that's just so fresh. Excuse me. They are both I mean, the actors themselves are both young. I mean, the doctor's not, he's like a bajillion years old, you know? But
1,000.
a bajillion, I believe, is the technical age of the doctor. You know, BBC can come at me for that. But yeah, the actors themselves are both young, and they are coming in with this energy, and it's such a great way to bring Doctor Who into 2024. You know, not that I think it was outdated with Jodie or Peter, but I think that it floundered a little for those 2 seasons, not 2 seasons, 2 doctors, those 2 doctors runs. It kind of floundered, so this feels like new and fresh, and it's not like a continuation of something that's already kind of like, "Meh," you know, it's just a jump in, exciting new thing.
Yeah, with the 12th Doctor, and we won't get too much into the past Doctors because we will be here for 12 hours. Um, it has a lot to do with the writing style sometimes, and sometimes the writing style doesn't really vibe with a lot of viewers. While you will never hear me personally say anything explicitly terrible about Doctor Who, I have been watching it since, 2005, and I unless it does something really uncharacteristically Doctor Who, then I might be like, "What in the world are you doing?" I will criticize it if it needs to be. Like, I will admit that Jodie's final season was a little bit hard to watch, and I was really sad that she didn't get more of a chance to shine. But again, that's just opinion based on the way it was written. But I feel like Russell T Davies had written some of the best episodes in Doctor Who, and for him to be back again with this fresh doctor, the young companion, it feels like Doctor Who again. Like not saying 13's run didn't feel like Doctor Who, but I feel like Whovians will know what I mean when I say it's back. Like this is what David Tennant's writing felt like, because that was Russell T Davies. Like there was that humor, right? It's like poking fun at itself. It's campy, it's over the top, like it doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's one of the most fun things about the series.
Right, and if you are watching this video and you're somebody who is just wanting to get into Doctor Who, you know, there's a lot of hype obviously right now because it is kind of being rebooted and brought to Disney Plus, and it's being given to a broader audience now, I guess you could say. They're really pushing for more accessibility. So again, if you're somebody who's like new into the fandom, Russell T Davies was on he started the reboot. He started New Who in 2005. So he's been around from the beginning that I've been watching. Like I've never watched classic Who. I personally just never got into it, but he's been Doctor Who from the beginning of the newer run. So if you're also new into Doctor Who, you have to remember that it is campy. You're not going to go into this show and there will be there's some serious moments and drama a lot of times, but there are absolutely ridiculous, nonsensical, insane moments, and it's something that I don't think you could criticize because this is what Doctor Who is. It doesn't, like Maddie said, it doesn't take itself seriously. It's kind of what Star Wars was in the beginning. Star Wars was always campy and sometimes ridiculous, and Doctor Who is like that as well.
I think we should kind of move into, recap and discussing, the episodes that are, available to watch right now. And we should start with Space Babies being that first episode. If you're watching because you watched, Ncuti Gatwa in something else, totally valid. Like you're not gonna be lost. You're not gonna be confused. Like it's great because in Space Babies, he tells Ruby who he is, what the TARDIS is, what it does, and then we get the whole cliche, well, what if I step on a butterfly? Will that change history? And the doctor's like, really? His reaction to her question, he's like, you would have to go out of your way to step on a butterfly in order to change history. And then 30 seconds later, she steps on a butterfly and it has this moment where it like shifts where she looks like an alien, and then he like saves the butterfly and everything's fine. But it just, again, that's the, it doesn't take itself too seriously because it plays into that question of the whole butterfly effect, and the doctor is like super judgy about it, and then it happened. And then
It's so silly.
faded away. But yeah, it that that's the humor. That's what I've missed from Doctor Who, because yes, I love the heart-wrenching sadness that we get sometimes, or like the intense reminders of what the doctor's gone through, and how they want to better themselves and the universe and all this stuff. But the humor, like I it my face was hurting from smiling, like, for the first half of this episode.
Oh, it was so cute, and he even did mention, like, oh, there can be at the end of the episode, he mentions, "I can't do X, Y, and Z because there are really bad repercussions and paradoxes." So he does touch on the intense things that will happen, but he does so with still an air of vibrance to him, even though it's, like, an intense moment that we'll get to in a little bit. He's, like, mentioning these things that are the fabric of time travel and the rules of Doctor Who. So Space Babies, though, I think, like Maddie said, the beginning was such a great little nod to what Doctor Who is supposed to be, and then it gets into the plot of the episode itself, which is, the Doctor and, oh my gosh, I almost just said Amy. I have Amy on the brain. The Doctor and Ruby wind up at this space station in, like, 2000, like, 2556 or something crazy like that, right?
It's like it's multiple digits, so it's like tens of thousands of years in the future. Like, it's not
Right,
like 500 years, it's crazy long time from now.
right. Yeah, they wind up there, and it does kinda remind me again of, like, Russell T Davies' first writing with the Ninth Doctor when he brings Rose and they're at a new place. So, he shows Ruby, opens the window and shows her, "You're in space, and here's the planet that we're looking at," and she has her existential crisis that all all of the
Yep.
companions have. She's like, "Oh my gosh, like, where's my mom? My mom's been gone for tens of thousands of years," and that's I think if this was real life, what we all would do.
I really loved that nod to the Ninth Doctor. There's an episode where he takes his companion Rose Tyler to basically the end of Earth. Like, they're going to watch like Earth basically explode in some really ridiculous far year in the future. And that's like her first time like seeing space, aside, and aliens, aside from like what's happening on her planet. And then you have the classic, well, give me your phone. The doctor does this for every companion. He takes his sonic screwdriver, and makes it so that way you can call your family from whatever year or wherever planet you are. And it was great. It was great.
I love Ruby because she's equal parts astounded, but also, like, ready to roll with the punches. She doesn't let it weigh her down, and of course, that's for the sake of the story. If she let it weigh her down, it's gonna take all this time of her having a crisis of identity in time and space. But Ruby's such a cool character. She's like, "Alright, this is wild. Let's go." But I will say the only thing I don't like is his sonic. I do not like the sonic screwdriver. It
No!
I don't like it. I know they're trying to be, like, new and different, but there's something to be said about that classic sonic screwdriver. I don't like this round, like, key fob he has going on.
It does look a little bit like a remote control versus a screwdriver, but that's the joy of the Doctor is, like, the 12th Doctor had sonic glasses. Like, he had sunglasses that were sonic. The sonic device is not just a Time Lord thing. There's an episode in the 10th Doctor's run where he runs into a nanny, which is kind of funny because this episode also deals with a nanny, but she has a sonic device and it's a pen. So the sonic device can be anything, look like anything. And even if you're not like a huge fan, which is valid, like I totally get that, you'd rather see you know, the classic holding of the sonic screwdriver. It can be anything. And the show is 60 years old, so they kind of, should mix it up a little bit so it doesn't fall flat, so it's not stale.
So I understand, like, the need to obviously do something new and different. It's 2004 Doctor Who. 2004. Wow, it's 2024 Doctor Who. I'm time traveling now. I don't know what's going on. It's 2024, so they're, updating it, they're making it more fun and different, but I do miss that old, like, cylindric screwdriver thing. I know I like if you don't watch Doctor Who, you're like, "What is she doing with"
And I don't have any of my Sonics near me, so I can't show them off.
Yeah, I'm sure it's part of pop culture. I think most people, even if you don't watch Doctor Who, know what the Sonic looks like.
And also, can we talk about how the Doctor wanted to push all the buttons when he was on the space station? It was very 10 of him to want to push all of the buttons. The very first episode of the 10th Doctor, he pushes a big red threatening button because he can.
Well, yeah, why not?
And the Doctor always has like this, little bit of whimsy about him because you have to, as a time traveler who is the last of their kind and has been around for over 1,000 years, like you still, if you don't look at the world with a sense of curiosity, you're gonna get upset about things real fast and things are gonna get boring and sad real fast. And so it's always really fun to watch the Doctor go into things like, "Ooh, I don't know what this is. Oh, I'm gonna press this big button over here. I'm gonna press the button," and then like for him to be surprised about what he finds on the space station, like is great.
It is, and I, was actually wondering, "Oh, like, what's going on when the Doctor sees this," they land on the space station, and the first thing after he pushes all these buttons, he sees a monster, and it kinda, like, was reminding me of, like, a Predator. It was kind of like that sort
Mhm.
of, gnarly monster with the big maw. It was
I
gross.
feel like it was more xenomorphy than Predator.
Yeah.
Like it gave me alien vibes for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's way more accurate. And this thing basically, like, comes at him and Ruby, and he's scared, and he keeps saying, "Why am I scared? Why am I scared?" And to me, obviously I didn't know what was gonna happen with the plot. I'm thinking, is this something that has to do with the regeneration? Or is this like, why is he so scared? I mean, the Doctor does get scared. They're not infallible, as despite being alien, they're only human. But that particular thing where he's scared of this boogeyman made me wonder, is it the boogeyman thing, or is this a new thing for the 15th Doctor?
Yeah, I thought the same thing actually, because a lot of the time, not really even all the time, I feel like every time the Doctor regenerates, they're learning something new about themselves because their personality does change, depending on which regeneration they are. Because they're different people with the same memories and feelings. And so with 10, he was like, "Am I the kind of guy to press a big button? Let's find out. Let's see." Presses the big button, right? Because the ninth Doctor was a little more serious, and then 10 was like, "I'm still figuring out who I am." 11 did the same thing, 12 did the same thing, and then 13, she was like, "I've never been a woman." Like, this is new, you know? And so with 15, he's running scared, so I thought the same thing. I was like, maybe this doctor is a little more cautious. Aside from him wanting to press all those buttons, maybe things do freak him out a little bit more. But then as the story unfolds, you realize, oh, no, this creature was designed to be scary for the sake of the children living on the space station.
Right, so, as far as, like, the plot goes, the first thing they encounter, obviously, is this boogeyman, and then they explore further into the space station, and they find, basically, it's being run by babies, space babies, and
Space babies.
he keeps saying, "Babies! Space babies!" He keeps saying, "They are space babies," and they're like, I don't they look like they're maybe, like, a year old or something, like, in baby form. They look like they're a year old, but then they open their mouths and they speak. They speak like they're intelligent, at least maybe, like, 10-year-olds or something. But they're in strollers, and the strollers are, like, carrying them around because there's no adults, there's no humans. They can't even walk yet, so they're space babies controlling this space center.
I loved the doctor correcting himself, calling them space babies because they're not babies. So the space station that they happen upon is like growing children, basically. But it has been abandoned for like 6 years. And unfortunately, the babies that were done, I guess you could say,
The farm.
and are actively like running the ship, maintained their babyness. And so they're not babies, which makes sense as to why the doctor is correcting himself. But, it was really sweet and a little bit sad because, they say they've never been held, they've never been picked up, they've never been hugged, so of course Ruby and the doctor, the first thing they do is they're picking up these babies and hugging them, and it's so cute. And I adore 15 and Ruby's connection because they're already like best friends. Like I already get that like bestie energy from them. Because and the minute the babies were like, "Are you our mom and dad?" They're like, "No,
We are not mommy and daddy,
we
no.
are not mommy and daddy." But they've been running this space station for such a long time by themselves. And one of the babies says, you know, did I grow up wrong? Like, did we grow up wrong? Because they've been on this space station for 6 years and they're still babies. And the doctor looks at them with like the sweetest look on his face and he says, nobody grows up wrong. And that's a like such an amazing thing to say to someone. It's such a beautiful quote. It's so amazing and really something that, we all should remember is nobody grows up wrong.
Eh, that that scene itself, I actually went back when it ended, that little speech between the doctor and her name was Poppy, she was the captain of the ship, and she was so cute. I actually rewound it and watched it over again because it was just such a magnificent moment, and acting-wise, like, Ncuti was phenomenal, but the emotion, I got all teared up. I was tearing up beforehand when the babies were like, "We've never been hugged," like, that just it was so sad.
It was.
And then the baby being so confused because she doesn't understand, like, why we're left why we were left behind, Why are we like this? And, the quote he actually goes on, like Maddie said, nobody grows up wrong. He says, "You are what you are, and that is magnificent." And I think that was just such a beautiful, poignant quote. And what I really also liked about this moment was that it was another way for the Doctor to tell about who he is through his discourse with Poppy. He says to her, "I was abandoned too, and I was found and by the people on the planet, and now I'm the last one, so I grew up just fine, right?" So again, it's not heavy on the exposition. It's just natural in this conversation with the baby, and it was such a heart-wrenching I I I don't even it was just so emotional. And what he specifically says, actually, I wrote it down. He says, "There's no one like me in the whole wide universe. No one like me exists, and that's true of everyone. And that is not a problem. That's a superpower."
Yeah, it's so sweet,
Ugh.
and like you said, it was the perfect way to fit in who the Doctor is without it feeling unnatural. And Ncuti's acting, it he was the perfect casting choice for the Doctor. Like, he does such a good job, even in just this one episode. Like, we'll get to the second episode in a little bit, but, like, in just this first episode, you get to see his wide range of emotions that he portrays, because the Doctor is a very deep character. They have gone through a lot, and it's really incredible to see the different interpretations of the Doctor from actor to actor, and Ncuti nailed it from the get-go.
Right, even from the Christmas special, if we're gonna go
Yeah.
back. But I was a fan of his. I watched Sex Education, and I loved him. He's a standout on Sex Education, and when they cast him, immediately, I was like, "Oh, he was just great on that." But I didn't know, obviously, what his Doctor would be like because his character on Sex Education is so extra. He's just great. I love him. His emotions are just so complex, and the way they connected to just me, just one person as a viewer, to me is phenomenal.
And, Millie does a phenomenal job too, as the companion, and they play off of each other so well, and it'll be really interesting to see who Ruby really is, because there's this whole
Mhm.
connecting theme of why are so many coincidences happening around Ruby. And I love when Doctor Who does this. I love it when each episode gives us different monsters, different, bad guys, but there's that overarching thread, right? There's that storyline that's connecting each individual episode as it goes. In the Christmas special, we see the Doctor watch Ruby be abandoned as a baby. She gets left on the doorstep of a church on Christmas Day, and then chaos ensues in the episode, and it's about babies. In this episode, space babies, the Doctor's like, again with the babies, and Ruby's like, well, I could have said the same thing to you. Like, what is going on with the baby thing, right? But then the Doctor is, like, thinking back to the snowfall of the day Ruby was left, and then the snow shows up on the space station while they're standing there, and the Doctor has no clue why it's doing that. And then in the next episode, I know we're kind of jumping forward just a little bit, but then in the next episode in The Devil's Chord, there's a scene again where the thought of her birth is mentioned, or she's thinking about it, or he's thinking about it, and then the snow falls again. Inside in 1963, Ruby's not even a thought in someone's mind in 1963. I am so intrigued as to what is going on with Ruby, because this is what happened with Amy, with the 11th Doctor, with his companion. There was something drawing him to her that he could not figure out, and that was the thread that like was woven through a lot of those early episodes for the 11th Doctor.
Yeah, that's kind of what I touched on earlier that I was waiting to get to. I didn't wanna jump too far ahead, but,
Sorry, it's mayhem.
yeah. No, it's mayhem, but yeah, 15 and Ruby are, so much like 11 and Amy because Amy, he brings her on the TARDIS, and there's so many inconsistencies about her, and he knows something's up, and he does the scan of her, and the thing with Amy, like, you have the snowflakes with Ruby. Amy has the crack in her wall. She has a crack in her wall and doesn't know what the crack is, and it scares her as a kid, and it's still around. And then you see the crack in the screens of the TARDIS, and the crack appears throughout that whole season, and it's like, what is going on, and why is Amy, like Ruby, can make unknowingly makes things happen. Like Amy loves, Roman soldiers, and Roman soldiers appear. So it was very much like Ruby. Ruby was abandoned in the snow and the snow happened. So I love that because I really, really love the Pawns and 11. That's like one of my favorite arcs of Doctor Who. But it's so intriguing as a viewer. Like I want to know what's going on. And I have a theory, but I don't wanna get into it until we get to Devil's Cord because it comes in a little more with that.
Yes. Yeah, and I
Mm.
think this is what we were missing with the 13th Doctor. Her first her first season was individual stories that were great, but they didn't have a whole lot of like, I guess you could say, substance to them, because you could just watch them without, watching the one before, kind of a thing. And they were enjoyable. I really did enjoy them. But there wasn't that theme of something is going on. And then they switched to her next season that had that thread of there's something else happening as each episode goes on. And I was like, there it is. But then her final season was a little bit too much of that, and I'm like, "Okay, you guys went in the wrong direction." Like, you were good with season 12, and then it it
They course
was too
corrected too hard.
it was too cinematic is what it was with that 13 with her final season. It was beautifully filmed, it was really intense, but it was a lot in a short amount of time. Unfortunately, Jodie was dealt the COVID card, so they had to change a lot of the way that they filmed things, how much they could film, what they could do, so I understand why they went in these directions that they did, but with Ncuti's Doctor, like, it's giving those of us who have watched the show for so many years, it's giving us what we were missing, and I just adore, again, I adore the humor. At the end of this episode, he wants the space station to move towards a planet where they can become refugees, but space stations don't move. They're stationary, right? But then he realizes that they have dirty diapers that he can use to to catapult the ship towards the planet, and then, and
It's
then
so ridiculous.
it's so funny, and then he says, "Let it rip," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh," like that it was so funny after such an intense moment with, like, the boogeyman and, the babies, and, like, you find out that there's one adult on this space station, and she's been kind of, like, hiding back as an automated nanny because she didn't want to abandon the babies like everyone else did, and then she got scared because she didn't want to die in front of them, kind of a thing, or she didn't wanna see them die because they only had so much supplies, And so she wants to protect the babies from this boogeyman, and so she thinks, shooting it out of an air, the air duct or whatever it's called, is the
The
way to
airlock.
go. Airlock, yeah. And then the doctor realizes, "Oh, wait a minute, like, this creature wasn't hurting anyone. It's the only one of its kind," again, so we get that empathy where the doctor's like, "Oh, crud, I made a mistake," you know? And so they end up saving this really disgusting creature. But because, the nanny felt so inclined to save these babies, it becomes this really emotional moment because she's like, "I wanna do what's best for them." But then the doctor's like, "Okay, yes, but hold on, like, we made a mistake. Like, this creature was designed to entertain the babies. You come to find out that the software on this space station was using this boogeyman as a way of entertainment. It was a children's story. To it was to teach the kids something, and it wasn't actually harming them. It was just really scary." And so they kind of figured out that they don't need to, worry about destroying it. And then, of course, after the really intense moments, you get the very silly, like, "Oh, this thing's made out of boogers, and it's" and
It's
now we're gonna
gross.
use yeah, it's gross, and now we're gonna use, like, built up farts, send the ship to the refugee planet, and, like, I'm like, "Yes, Doctor Who is back."
And I did love the boogeyman too because, like you said, it's the only one of its kind, and it's, again, reminding the viewers that the Doctor is too. He's the only one of his kind. I mean, unless the Master shows back up because the Master always is around is somewhere.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was a cute little nod, but and I loved when he saved the boogeyman and the kids were all excited. The babies were all excited because they realized they actually love this weird, scary monster because it's their weird, scary monster. So it was really a really good episode, and when it ended and then the Devil's Chord started, there have been, I think, 6 months 6-month jump because the Space Babies happens right after the Christmas special, and then, I thought I was like, "Oh, they're talking as if they've traveled together," because Ruby keeps saying, "You never do this, you never do that," and I'm like, at first I was like, "That's a little odd because she just met him," and then they say, "Oh, what time is it in your time?" And she says, "Oh, it's like June or July 2024." So at the end of Space Babies to the beginning of the Devil's Chord, the Doctor and Ruby have been traveling together for, like, 6 months. So, it was a nice way to skip time without skipping too much, and also not cheapening any development between the 2 of them.
I totally agree, and it's funny, I didn't catch that at first, but then it made sense that there was gonna be some time between them and it wasn't, back to back moments. The Devil's Chord was a really was a really cool episode, but that one, like, was way more campy. It was more off the wall than I could have expected in the best of ways. They time travel to the 1960s. Ruby wants to see when the Beatles recorded their first album. And it's funny because at first you think the doctor's like totally going to judge her and he's like, "Really? That's where you want to go?" And then he's like, "Yes, most people want to see, X, Y, and Z." And he's like, "Yes, no one ever asks me to go there. Let's go." You get another little history lesson about Doctor Who in this episode. And again, the way it's written feels very natural because Doctor Who did start in 1963 and the TARDIS does first appear in a junkyard. And the Doctor is time traveling with his granddaughter, Susan, and they're standing on this building and he's like, I live over there." And Ruby's like, "Y- what do you mean you live over there?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, in this era in 1963, my TARDIS is over there at, I forgot exactly what corner he says, at a junkyard with my granddaughter Susan. I wonder how she's doing. I wonder if she's okay." And Ruby's like, Wait, you have kids? You have a family? Like, what?" And it was really fun to get that nod to the very first episode, really, of Doctor Who in such a fun way because I feel like Ruby would be a lot of us like, "Wait, the Doctor has a grandchild?" Like, if you don't know classic Who history, like, you wouldn't know. But again, this is why this series is such a perfect jumping off point if you want to start Doctor Who and have never seen an episode or anything. Like, you can easily watch and get caught up at the same time.
It's funny because I was watching it and my mother happened to just be around in the living room, and she stopped what she was doing and she was watching it. And she wasn't even, like, really asking questions, which, you would have gotten if I was watching, like, the middle of 12's run where there's some insane storyline going on. It's a brand new start. It's nothing that you need to know. And what I liked about the reference to his children and grandchildren is that while other doctors in New Who also reference having children, they all skim over it. So as a viewer, I always wanted to know more too because I've never watched Classic Who. I don't really know like the real backstory there with the children. I know enough, I know enough to know what happened to everybody. But all the others, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, all of them have briefly touched on it just because a companion has maybe mentioned something and blown over it. So, I like that this doctor was like, "Yeah, I had kids and I had a grandkid," and it was actually addressed. And it made me wonder if that's something that's gonna come up again throughout the season because of how he was talking about Susan when he was like, "I wonder where she is, like, I don't know if she died because of the genocide on Gallifrey, like, I don't know what happened when that ran throughout time and space." So, I mean, hypothetically, Susan could still be around. That's what I thought right away.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I was low key hoping that he would try to go see her, but then that would have been wildly hypocritical of him because in at the end of Space Babies, he told Ruby that they cannot go to when she was born or go see, her birth mother or something. So for the Doctor to go to himself would not work. Like, we've seen the Doctor in multiple forms in a bunch of episodes before, but that's because something happened to make that a thing. And in this episode, there was nothing to make it so he could see himself. So, like, in the anniversary episodes, we have multiple doctors because there's some weird shift in the universe. There's some paradoxy, whatever thing going on that, like, sets it up for there to be, oh, 11 and 10 are in the same room, 14 and 15 are in the same room. Like, they can be in the same space at the same time because of these things that are set up. But here, it wasn't the time
Oh, look at that. Would you look at
for
that?
that.
But
But I loved Maestro.
oh my
They
god.
they were the big bad in this episode, and one of the threads in Doctor Who is knocking. And because the master, who is another Time Lord, has the sound of the drums stuck in their head. And so it's this ominous, 1, 2, 3, 4 knocking that you hear throughout the new Who generation, which is Doctor Who from 2005 till the 13th Doctor's run is over. And so when we hear knocking in this episode, I got so excited. I don't think Maestro is the master, but
No.
Maestro and master are very similar sounding, so it was fun.
It was so fun. I'm so glad you said that because I didn't write it down in my notes, but I thought so too. But at first I was like, "Oh, maybe it's just like a coincidence because, like, Maestro is in the piano trying to get out, but then I'm like, "No, Russell T Davies wrote these, right? He wrote all of them, there's no coincidences." Again, I also don't think Maestro is the master. I think they have made it pretty clear that they're setting up that there's these, like, ancient gods kind of, and Neil Patrick Harris in the specials was one of them. He was a toy maker, and now Maestro is his child, which is perfect. Like, Maestro would be Neil Patrick Harris's child. Like, that is, like, the best the best little interconnected thing ever. And I wrote in my little notes, "Big props to the wardrobe department because the outfit that Maestro had on was unbelievable." It was like this well, there were a few dresses I think that they wore, but the one with it had like this big collar and it was all piano keys. It was just stunning. It stole the show to me, and I'm not somebody who's, like, really big into fashion. I know there are a lot of people who really get into the wardrobe of Doctor Who, and I just really am not very knowledgeable about that kind of thing. That just completely stunned me. I thought it was gorgeous, and Maestro's design in general, like the, orange kind of, like, almost like buns, it was Winifred Sanderson, like, it was completely hocus pocus. It was so fantastic, so fantastic.
Yeah, they had such an incredible look, and I forgive me, I don't remember who the actor was that was cast for that role,
Yeah,
but
it's Jinx Monsoon.
the acting, again, just superb, like, so villainous and just bad, and it's funny because their whole bit is stealing music. So the premise of this episode, right, is someone found this like ancient chord on a piano that no one's allowed to play because it's called the devil's chord, and it ends up summoning the maestro. You know, there's this child in the beginning who's like supposedly being taught piano by this elderly gentleman, and his name is Henry Arbinger, and then it gets mashed together for it to be Harbinger, and it's like this big dramatic entrance, which it should be when there's a big bad like this. Like, it should be all drama. And I wrote down, I put never say yes in Doctor Who when someone asks to you to set something free, because the minute, I feel like that has happened more often than not, where the big bad is like, you know, I can set this free for you, or I can, you know, make you feel free and blah, blah, blah. And of course, you're like, well, yes, please. And then you die. So
Yeah, yeah. It was very Ursula. It was very sea
it
witchy.
was. It was, yes. And I actually wrote that down too. I was like, this felt very Little Mermaidy with the way that they were taking music out of like people's hearts and pulling it, like if someone started singing, they were pulling it from their mouth, and like it it wasn't a bad thing. Like, it's not, you know, oh, this is so Little Mermaid. I was like, no, this is like sea witch style like villainy, and I loved it.
Yeah, and what the great thing is about this villain, this I was gonna say Harbinger, no, this Maestro, is that it's a likable villain, not likable like, they're evil. They are evil, and you obviously don't want them to win, but it's not a villain where you're like, "Oh my god, I hate them so much, like, I hope the doctor blah, blah, blah." They are so captivating to watch, and you wanna see what they're gonna do next and how the doctor is gonna defeat them, and that's such a sign it's a sign of such great writing when you are just as invested in what kind of shenanigans the villain is gonna do as you are to the hero, and I think that the scene that really illustrates that is when the doctor silences everything, and Maestro has a tuning fork, and that scared the crap out of me. I don't know what it was about that tuning fork that scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, it was really interesting to watch that scene, and even in the silence, the acting spoke volumes. Like, it was so quiet, and it's one of those things where, like, you if you wanna, like, look away because, like, as a parent, maybe your child is doing something, and so you can still listen, but you kinda, like, turn away because you need to do X, Y, and Z, or, like, you get a text message, so you look down at your phone and you, like, reply real quick, and then you're watching. But in that moment, you can't look away, and not even because it's silent, but because you don't want to. Like, it's so intense for it to have just gone completely silent. It was eerie, and th the act it blew me away.
It was so good, and the idea that they were in 1963 going to see the Beatles themselves was great to me because some of my favorite Doctor Who episodes are when they're historical bottle episodes, but this wasn't necessarily a bottle episode. Obviously, there's, again, a interconnecting thread of these ancient, powerful villains and monsters that are being drawn forth from, I think he says, from hell. This one's from hell because of Ruby, is the assumption. But it is still a historical journey. He takes Ruby to see the Beatles, to see a historical site. And that's always really fun to me. And it's always fun to see how they portray these famous historical figures. So you have, John Lennon and you have all the Beatles. It was really fun to see that too. And it was so silly the twist they did where the Beatles are actually terrible because all music is terrible and everybody hates music because they're afraid because of the maestro.
Yeah, it was really fun to watch the, people who were supposed to be the Beatles sing a song about their dog named Fred, and it was so awful, but so catchy at the same time. But you mentioned the historical, figures, is that's how Doctor Who started. So in 1963, when Doctor Who came out, it was meant to be a historical show for children. That's what it started out. It was the Doctor was traveling through time and to teach a lesson, kind of a thing. And yeah, there were obviously creative liberties because it's a sci-fi show, right? But then it kind of moved into more of like the aliens in the space and stuff like that when, viewership finally went up and stuff. Um, and so keeping those historical figures is very important because that's the heart of Doctor Who. And so we got to see the Beatles as well as the birthplace really of Doctor Who in the beginning, and it was great.
Yeah, it was so fun. The historical stuff, I feel like it got forgotten a lot until Jodie's run. So I really enjoyed seeing those historical figures in that run, but I liked how this is tied to something more. It's not just like going to see the Beatles for funsies, It's just,
Mhm.
I mean, it is, but it turns out to be so much more than that. Maestro is such a captivating villain, and when they're having that final confrontation with the Doctor and Ruby, and they're like playing the piano and like preaching kind of at the Doctor and calling him out. I love, love, love that the Maestro says, "Timey-wimey."
I loved it. I was like, "Oh my gosh, please bring back the silly things the Doctor says," because each Doctor, starting with New Who, at the very least, had a funny little catchphrase. So, like, the Ninth Doctor, his big thing was fantastic. That's what he said about everything was fantastic, right? The 10th Doctor talked about, you know, how things were all wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. And
Oh, and
then
he had
he
Z.
would also yell Allons-y, which is French for let's go. And then the 11th Doctor would say Geronimo when he got really excited about something. That was his way of like getting to do something fun and, crazy. And then that kind of fell off with the 12th Doctor. He didn't really have like a very fun catchphrase, but the 12th Doctor I understood because he was a more jaded version of the Doctor. So I understood it. But then with 13, she didn't really have a fun little saying. And there were no like callbacks to it either. And so for this to have the timey-wimey called back, like it made me giggle. It made me giggle. It was really sweet. But speaking of giggle, that's how we figured out that the maestro had something to do with the toy maker. So the toy maker was in the specials leading up to the 60th anniversary where we first saw Ncuti's Doctor. And the toy maker was also a villain in Classic Who. I do believe you cannot find those episodes anywhere. I think they're lost. But you can look it up. You can Google, toy maker Doctor Who, and you'll find like a Wikipedia page kind of a thing. But I don't think those episodes are available to watch. The Doctor is terrified of the toy maker because he has this really intense, really incredible power over people, over time, over the universe. And then you hear the giggle that is used for him in his episode with the maestro. And that's when the Doctor's like, oh no, like, yikes. And I don't I don't think this is the last of the maestro. I think we're gonna see them again. Like, I have a feeling
Yeah,
we're gonna see them again.
I agree. I think I kind of imagine that these villains, you have the toy maker, the maestro, I think there'll be more. It's kind of like a pantheon of villains is what I think that they're basically saying. Because the doctor has said, oh, they're a these godlike villains wreaked havoc or whatever. So the implication is that there's more than just the two of them, and that, why now? Why now are two of them back to back coming out and wreaking havoc now with these within 6 months of each other? So I think this is, earlier when I said I didn't want to get too much into my theory on Ruby, this is what I think is happening. I think Ruby is somehow the key to why these powerful, like, almost undefeatable villains are coming out. I don't know if she is, like, descended from them because, she talks about her mother, like, who's her mother, but who is her father? Like, they don't ever talk about that either. And Maestro refers to Ruby as a creature. He's like, "This creature shouldn't exist." So, like, my theory is that she's, like, half of this v villainous pantheon and, like, maybe half human. So this is why there's all these inaccuracies going on with her. I don't know. That's kind of, like, where I'm at right now, 2 episodes in, but it kind of seems like she is somehow tied to the rise of these villains like the Toymaker and Maestro.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because at the end of this episode, the maestro has Ruby wrapped up in the music notes and is trying to steal the song that she was creating, but it was the wrong song. The maestro kept saying this isn't the right song because it was the song of Christmas that started playing, and then the snow started falling again in this episode, and the maestro's like, there's something wrong here, like this isn't right. This same relative scene happens around where there's a music battle, and it's funny because I was watching it with my 9-year-old, and the minute the maestro pulls up their instrument and the doctor gets behind the piano, my kid goes, it's going to be a music battle. And then 2 seconds later, the maestro goes, music battle. And it was, it was so much fun because again, this was the over the top, like ridiculousness that can be Doctor Who, with the doctor and the companion just happening to know what song that they're going to play, and that they both happen to know the same song on the piano, right? And they move around at the same time. It was very musical like. And I was laughing because I made a joke. I was like, this felt very like the devil went down to Abbey Road. Like that's
Oh
like
my god, it did! Especially because the maestro had the violin, had the fiddle.
yeah, and it was so cool. And then of course, the Beatles save the day with their music coming back to life, and they get to play this chord together that like makes the maestro go away. And so I loved that that's the way that it looked like it was going to end. But then you have a fourth wall break, which I I don't think I've ever seen in Doctor Who. I don't think I have ever seen the doctor look at the camera, wink, and then start doing something. So he was like, there's always a twist. He winks, and then they break out in song and dance. And they start singing about how there's always a twist at the end. And I,
It was so good!
it was amazing. And then you see Henry again. You see him in the
Mm,
beginning of the episode, and he disappears when the maestro says who he is. And he's like, okay, I don't need you anymore, right? Because I think it was just the maestro planting a body basically to make it, a grand entrance. But then while everyone's singing and dancing and there's always a twist, whatever, you see Henry like standing in a doorway kind of like looking around. And so to me that's like, well, the maestro is coming back. Like this
right.
it's coming back. There's always a twist at the end. Yeah, we're this is not the last of the maestro.
Yeah, I wonder if that little child, Henry, is a conduit for all of these villains or just specifically the maestro, because it would be interesting if he was tied to, like, all of them, like, he is their like, I mean, I took it to be that he wasn't actually, like he's more of a manifestation of something, you know? So I wonder if he's, like, their way of being brought into the human world. So I'm curious to see where that goes, and I really liked that ultimately the way Maestro was defeated wasn't the doctor because it shows that the doctor is not infallible. He's
Mhm.
not all powerful. He doesn't always win. He doesn't always have the answer at the end and he messes up. He messes up the last note he has to play. And it's John Lennon and Paul McCartney that ultimately saved the day, so the Beatles saved the world. So that was really cool to remind audiences that this isn't necessarily a story where the superhero is always gonna be the doctor. He's flawed also and doesn't always have the answers, but I'm super curious to see what Henry has to do with the other villains and if he's, like, somehow able to bring them to reality, and I'm also curious to see what the maestro meant when they were being dragged back to hell through the piano and grabbed onto the piano and pointed at Ruby and the doctor and said, "The one who waits is coming," or something along those lines, but the one who waits. What's going on?
Mhm.
What is that?
Yeah, and we still have the whole thing with that when the doctor went back to watch Ruby, be placed at the church, whoever placed her shifted, looks directly at him and points at him. And so now it's not just Ruby was just an abandoned child. Now we're like, okay, clearly she has some connection somewhere to something in the universe that's beyond just being abandoned as a baby, which I love it when they give the companions this complex way of fitting in with the doctor. I definitely don't mind when they're just, normal humans, obviously, because it's still makes for a great story. But with this, it's going to keep you on your toes. And then at the end of the episode, when they go back home, Was it this episode or was it the one before where the doctor's doing the scan? The doctor is scanning Ruby, whether it was the end of Devil's Chord or the end of Space Babies. Like, it doesn't really matter which one because he is desperately trying to figure her out. And so are we.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, it was Space Babies because the way Devil's Chord ended was that big musical number and then it
Oh, that's
fades to
right.
black.
Duh. That's
Yeah.
right. Duh, duh, duh. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which I like my thoughts on the musical number was I loved it. I was grinning from ear to ear. It was so cute. It was so fun. It's such a great episode to tie literally everything that Doctor Who is supposed to be up into one.
Yeah. Yeah, these 2 episodes really did a great job, and I really like that it was in Space Babies, it was more of a monstery type story, and then this one was more of, like, a big bad villain versus a scary monster, but again, they had that thread of what's going on with Ruby in both, and it was not repetitive from episode to episode, but it was also not vastly different, if that makes sense. Like, it felt like a really good story flowing between Space Babies and The Devil's Chord.
I I cannot wait to see what else is in store for these villains, and are they all gonna be American? That will be pretty interesting too.
Yeah, I don't know. I
American
mean,
musicians, maybe.
I know Jonathan Groff is supposed to be in an episode,
Oh my
so
god, you're right.
yeah, and I don't know if he's gonna be a villain or not, but I know he's supposed to be in an episode at some point. I think it's from the previews, it looks like the one that Ruby can like talks like it's like Bridgerton. So it'll be really interesting again to see how these characters come to life and how they all end up, you know, being one like unit of villains, I guess.
A plus for Ncuti and Millie, right?
Oh, 100%. I knew that I would enjoy them. I again, you well, it's really hard to disappoint me when it comes to Doctor Who. It's really hard for me to, not like it. But man, they like 15 already is like skyrocketing to one of my favorite doctors. Like I have a hard time telling you who my favorite doctor is just because they all are so incredible in their own ways. But man, like I love these two. I love them.
We would love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts on these 2 episodes and your theories. Yeah, you can reach us anywhere, right, Maddie?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want us to talk more about Doctor Who, leave us a comment and let us know. I can talk about Doctor Who forever and ever. Um, um, my personal handle has the word Whovian in it for a reason. But yeah, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any more mayhem, and stay tuned for more mayhemy ramblings.